We began this process in ceremony. It was important I honored our Nehio ways by offering my father tobacco to start this off in a good way, to share our stories in a good way. My father lifted the pipe to ground our hearts and minds for what we are about to share. One of the most destructive policies of the Indian Act was the creation of residential schools. Today, we acknowledge those that attended residential schools as survivors. My father is one of those survivors. He was 8 years old when he was forced to attend Blue Quills Indian Residential School. My father attended Blue Quills from 1958 to 1966. At the age of 16, he finally left a school system that he can only describe as a living hell. The journey to reclaiming his cultural identity continues to this day. Our family invites you to sit with us as we share our journey.
My spirit name is Waps Dagwan Giheo Na Bill, which means white-head eagle man. I'm thankful for that name because my kids, my daughter, my sons were, I think, all have that name, eagle, in their given Indian name. My daughter is White Eagle Woman, Terry, and Joel. Kiheo Gao Pahut Siga So. So I guess I would have to say we're from the Eagle clan. I turned to our culture 40 plus years ago. I was taught by an elder, past, long gone now. I videotaped him. His name was John Cross. He's the one that introduced me to our culture. He taught me the ropes, he taught me the songs, the prayers. And he's the one that told me, one day you're going to be sitting where I'm sitting. You're going to be talking to people. And I told him, no way, I can't. I don't know how to talk my language. I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to sing. He said, you will learn. And he was right. My father was the one that taught me, and brothers, older brother, that I followed their ways in hunting. So as the years went by, I was the main hunter for my dad. My dad always picked me up to go hunting and drive for him, to go in the bush, pack meat, cut meat. So he taught me all that, to call animals, to call moose, to call elk. He taught me all that, and today I'm grateful for that too. The elders gave us knowledge. Now it's our turn to pass it on to you guys. Then when your turn comes up, you're passing on to the future, to my grandchildren, to my great-grandchildren. And that's how it goes. I'm thankful of their mother, Leona. When I wasn't there was a lot of times I wasn't there. Today I regret that. Their mom looked after them very well and taught them the values, family values we have. I also taught my children here, my kids, compassion, sharing, loving each other is very important with my family. And I know they pass that on to their kids, my grandchildren, to be together as a family, to support one another. And that's all there is in this world is family. That's number one.
You told me it was like you weren't loved, and that you didn't know how we knew you loved us, but you didn't know how to say it. And I think from that point it changed for me, and how you approach me. You actually tell me you love me now.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't to that point, to my early 20s, that you never said that to me, because you didn't know how.
I seldom heard the word love. All we were was a number. My number was 47. I wasn't called by my name. Maybe once a year I was called by my name when I had to go and see medical or reasons or something. They called me by my first name. But that was it. Then when I came home, I knew my parents loved me. I knew. I went home, back home, but they never really said it to me, ever. My dad never said it. But I knew he loved me, the way he treated me, through action, love. It was powerful, very powerful. My mom did say, "Sagitan," quite a few times, which means I love you. But deep down here, I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know how to say, because 8 years of not hearing that and being angry at the same time. Deep down, there was a lot of garbage in there at the time. I still got some left in there today, but not as much as way back when. My kids are the ones that taught me love. And I thank you, my kids, my girls, my sons.
I remember a time when we went to see Masamikukam in Bonnyville. And we were coming home, and I think it was treaty days back home. We were in a car. I forget the color of that car. And there was foot races, and you told me to go race, because I think it was $5 or $10 for first place. Because we used to always play outside, and I'd be one of the faster runners. But I was wearing my moccasins, and I was too embarrassed, too ashamed to go run without runners. And so I made up a lie and said I had a stomach ache and I wasn't feeling well. But you would always tell us, be proud of who you are, be proud of being Cree, and you're going to get an education, going to get a better education than we did. And so that's what we did. And it's good to see you as grandparents showing the love to the grandkids that we maybe didn't hear those words growing up as often, but we see you, how you interact with the boys and the girls, and that makes me happy.
You know, I realized as I got older that not hearing love from you as our father, I think for me, it was compensated by how much love I got from mom and my older siblings. It was like having an extra set of parents who protected and watched over me. But one of the memories that I have of high school where I didn't feel like you were showing love, and it took me about 10 years to realize that what you were doing was showing me love, and it was tough love. Back in high school, I really wanted to study foreign languages, and it's an interest I still have. And I found a summer program in Spain to go study Spanish for the summer. And mom was supportive of it. And when I asked you, you were very clear and blunt with me that no, I wouldn't be going, and that I needed to learn Cree. That if I was going to be learning another language, it should be ours. And at the time, I did not understand. I thought that I had an interest that was not being supported.
I wanted you to learn Cree, our language. It was very important. Now you know. Your late Muslim, my dad also treated me the same way I treated you. He never said, I love you. He's the one that used to come and get me. Let's go. That was his love showing me. He trusted me out of all the brothers and sisters because he knew I'd never say no to him. I would have to get off work or not go to work because he wanted to go to the bush and show me what he knew. And that's love for me. You didn't have to say it. It was all action, through action.
I find myself at Blue Quills realizing how important that language is and how much love you were trying to show me back then of how important this is to who we are as Cree people. And even though I didn't understand it at the time, I understand it now and have made that commitment, which is why I've made the decision to return home to learn our language, because I know there is so much lost when we don't speak our language, the meaning behind it. And so for me, that's a very clear memory I have, that it took me years to fully wrap my head around, that you were showing me love, and you were protecting our language and our identity by trying to instill in me the importance, but I just wasn't ready at the time.
I didn't mean to do what I'd done to you. It's just that's just the way your Muslim taught me. I know with the rest here, a little bit different, huh? But, and your Kogum, that's another part that I never mentioned to you guys. My mom was a Bible person, religion. She took that religion, the Bible. I don't know if it was Anglican or, but anyway, she wanted me to be a preacher. And I said, no, I can't, because I took the sweet grass already. The elder taught me this, and that's where I feel.
When you talked about Muslim coming to get you to go hunting, and you wouldn't say no, you leave work early. I think as siblings, that's what we do for each other. When something comes up, we drop everything and we help each other, and that'll continue, and that's just how it's always been.
As we've been talking about love, I think that, we've all experienced love in our family, from our parents. We have experienced it in ways of, action, as Dad has said, and I'm so thankful that, I get to learn from you today. I am thankful that my children get to learn from you. We have amazing, kiddos in our family who are growing up with things that we didn't have, experiences that we didn't have, with love. We openly now as families talk about how much we love one another. My kids are constantly telling me all day, that they love me. And I think that, that's been this family. We've always, we got here because of that. We've always had this foundation of support with Mom, who was that that core person who was really showing us unconditional love in all situations.
Hello, my name is Micah, and I'm in grade 3. And I'm wearing an orange shirt because to remember the kids who went to residential school. My Moo went to residential school for 8 years, and it made me feel really sad. It made me feel really sad because he basically couldn't do anything. It was just like torture. He got taken away from his family. He couldn't speak his culture, and like he couldn't even like smudge. It's important for kids to learn about residential school because we never forget the kids who died, and we never forget the history. I'm proud to be Cree because I get to do all these fun things like hunting, smudging, or like a pipe ceremony.
Hi, I'm Liam. I am in grade 7. Talking to my Muslim and Kukum today makes me proud that they know all about Indigenous culture and community. They have taken me to a lot of ceremonies, piping ceremonies, and they showed me smudging. I'm just proud of them for surviving residential school, and it makes me feel good inside knowing they survived and kept their culture alive. I think it's really important that children should learn about Indigenous people in school. They might, but they really aren't learning too much about it sometimes. Like some are learning very little other than about residential school, and I think it's important that they know a full history of what happened and why it's important. And what residential school did was horrible. To this day, a lot of Indigenous people don't even know their own language or culture.
My name is Ella, and I'm in grade 9. While I was growing up, I've always been in ceremony. When I was a baby, when I was growing up, and it was a big part of my life. It helped me a lot. When I was in ceremonies, it's different almost every time. Everyone has a different experience in them, but almost every time it's just this really good experience. It's like, I always feel great after. It makes me feel better, like if I'm having a bad day or something. Well, when I first learned about Indian residential schools, I learned it from my parents a lot. Schools never really taught me much about Indian residential schools. I only really learned about Orange Shirt Day, and still they didn't really go into very much detail about it. And I learned almost all my information from my parents. When I was in Paquette, I was there to help volunteer while my mom was helping out find the unmarked graves in Paquette. I was there to help cook food as volunteer. I believe it's important for people to learn about the history, basically just to stop myths from going around, rumors, and just to learn about what happened. Because a lot of people think oh, it's not that bad, it's just boarding schools or something. But they really don't know what really happened in there. And it's really sickening what goes on in those schools. I believe it's okay for children to learn about Indian residential schools at a young age because children as young as 3 have been put into Indian residential schools, and they were put through things that a lot of people couldn't handle. And it's important for kids to be educated on the history of what happened in those schools. And they don't have to go into detail, just the basics of it. I hope that non-Indigenous people are able to have more compassion and just to understand what happened and just to be educated on Indian residential schools. My Muslim and my Kokumbernis survived Indian residential school, and I'm so thankful that they did so I can be here today.
My name is Nevin, and I'm in grade 11. I'm non-Indigenous. I am partially Japanese and European, and my stepdad is Indigenous. In school, I've learned that residential schools have taken away the traditions from Indigenous people, and that it has impacted them for generations, and that it still is impacting them, and it's still a problem. In school, I was told there's no residential schools still standing in Alberta, but there's the Blue Quills University, which used to be a residential school. I'm proud of my Missum because he's worked hard to get to where he is. He went to residential school, and that's tough, and he used the traditional ways to cope with everything.
Wapiki Hosko Nitsigasun on its Capone Cotinia, Joe Cardinal, Notawi Equa, Leona Cardinal, Nikawi. My name is Terry Cardinal, and I am from Salt Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory. And I am the daughter of Joe Cardinal and Leona Cardinal. I currently work with MacEwan University as the Director of Indigenous Initiatives, and I'm also doing my PhD with the University of Calgary, where I am studying social work, but more focused on understanding trauma, understanding healing in ceremony and traditional end-of-life practices. Last year, I was invited to apply for a position as the Indian Residential School Coordinator with Blue Quills University, which was to begin the search for unmarked graves at the university. And I did that knowing that that work would be difficult, but I did it because it was something I felt was important for my family and my community. And so I went back. I went back home and I sat with elders and I sat with survivors and heard their stories over the last year. And part of that process was also inviting my two daughters in that journey with me. My daughter Micah is 10 years old and grade 5, and my daughter Ella is 13 going into grade 9. And each of them were part of the events that we hosted at the University at Blue Quills. When I started there, we did our first search in phase 1, and both girls were with me during that process, as well as my family and my dad. I know that process was really hard for my dad. You know, he was honest with me in telling me that it was really difficult for him to be on site. At that time, I offered him tobacco to do a pipe ceremony there on one of the mornings. And I was purposeful in who I invited into that space. And it was survivors who had returned to that way of life, to our way of life. And, you know, I remember my dad talking about how life-changing that was for him, how it gave him an opportunity to let go, and something shifted inside of him. And I feel like as children of Indian residential school survivors, we have opportunities to help our parents heal as well through these processes. You know, my dad wasn't shown love in those schools, and part of my journey in being his daughter was to show him and teach him love. And so expressing love in a way that he may not have experienced as a child. And because of that, you know, in the dynamics of our family and some of the struggles that we've also experienced, but we've always been a really strong family. And we've been strong because of our connection to culture, to ceremony, to language. There's always been hope that has been the center of our belief that we are never to give up. And, you know, we heard that a lot growing up. That was always something that was, you know, ingrained in us almost. That we were never to give up, regardless of the things that we were going through. And so my daughters were a part of the searches. They were also part of the healing gatherings that we had. As a mother who has studied trauma, and as a mother who has specialized in understanding trauma, more so within Indigenous people, it was important for me that I taught my children and educated my children about our history. Oftentimes we may be fearful to share with our children. I know that, in Western education, public education systems, some may feel that we shouldn't be teaching young children about the stories of Indian residential school, that they may be too traumatic. And there's different ways. You're definitely not going to go into sharing very detailed stories of abuse to young children. Children are smart and they have an understanding. And so if they have an understanding of some of that language around abuse, those are the terminologies that you can use. My youngest daughter, Maya, was with me this past April. And it was when we released the findings of the 9 reflections of interest that we found in phase 1 at Blue Quills University. And she took part in that ceremony with me. And, we were there with elders. And I had to go and offer tobacco in each of those markers that were placed in that area. And the elder had asked my daughter to be part of that her presence there represented those children. And she was responsible for tying each of the teddy bears to each of the markers. And that was really meaningful for her, for her to carry that role and to be part of that and to understand. In that same space, she sat and she heard survivors speak publicly in the media. And I've asked her a few times, what was that like for you? And, she talked about how it was sad. My oldest daughter talks about how it is sad. It's sad, but it's also important. It's important for others to know about our history, our truths, that people know about us so that they have more compassion. I've been asked many times about my work at Blue Quills as the Indian Residential School project coordinator. And while the purpose of the job in itself was to start a process in which we were searching for unmarked graves, going in, I was very mindful that this journey had to be really foundational in creating opportunities for healing.
Danse Clarice Anderson, Natsigasun, Onits Kapone, Atsinia. Hello everyone, my name is Clarice Anderson. I'm from Satellite Cree Nation and I've been in education for 22 years. I have an arts degree, I have a degree in education, and I have a master's in land-based education from the University of Saskatchewan.
And my name is Paquette and I'm her husband. But I'm also currently a city councillor. I'm also an artist and an author, public speaker. And my family is both Métis and Cree. And the Cree comes from good fish.
So one of the reasons why I went into education, and I think I always knew as a young girl that it was important for me to go into education because of my own experiences in school. I didn't feel that I could see myself reflected in the halls and walls. I didn't read about my ancestors or Indigenous people at all throughout my school experience. And it was really important for me to go on to university because my parents really pushed that education was important and that it was important to go through the education system due to their own experiences in residential school their own experiences with discrimination and racism.
The trauma from residential school is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a whole host of legislation and policies from the federal government over the history of Canada that has massively, negatively impacted Indigenous communities by design that a lot of people don't even know about. There is a lot to learn, and residential school is not the be-all and end-all of it. That's just the beginning. And the reason it's the beginning is because it's the point where people finally started to tell their stories. And in Canada, people say, well, how come we have no Canadian identity? It is these conversations that allow us to unpack that and open it up, because truly what Canada has is an Indigenous identity. And as long as we keep that part of our history pressed down and refuse to deal with it and refuse to heal it, we will never know the beauty of what that means. And part of what it means is that Indigenous communities were very welcoming. When newcomers came, they were astounded by the wealth and the elegance of Indigenous cultures and societies. And it's just very much a tragedy that greed and ideology led leaders of Canada to destroy that.
As educators, one of the ways that you can talk about residential schools in your classrooms is bringing out literature. There's a lot of great books written by Indigenous authors in Canada. There's also documentaries, there's videos, there's podcasts. There's a lot of information out there. I think one of the most important ways, though, is sitting down with survivors and sitting in circle and listening to their stories with an open heart and open mind, because there's lots that still hasn't come to light. There's a lot of stories out there that we still need to learn, and it is our responsibility. It's for our future generations.
Well, often when we talk about these things, the word resilience comes up, and that's great. It's good to have resilience, it's good to have strength, but I dream of the day when resilience isn't needed. But why is there that resilience? Why didn't communities completely collapse? Why do we still have strong Indigenous cultures? And why are languages starting to flourish once again? And it's because of the love that families give to one another.
I remember as a young girl, and I think I was in kindergarten, and just watching my mom read all the time. She had a ton of books in the house, and she would read every day, all day. And I think that's really what started my love of reading. And I would go to the library and I would take out as many books as I can, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about the world. It's almost like I had two different lives happening, because then we'd go out with, we'd go hunting on the weekends, and I'd go with my dad, and he'd be setting out his snares, and you'd see him offer tobacco, offer protocol. And then that was a different education for me. That was an education of learning of respect, learning of natural laws. And that was just as important as my Western education. I have a lot of gratitude to my dad for surviving residential school. And I have a lot of gratitude to my mom for always being there and always supporting us and always pushing us to do better. My dad, a few years after residential school, he connected with an elder. And I remember him singing songs in the kitchen. I remember him going out into the land, building a lodge. And I was watching role models in practice. And I have a lot of gratitude that he reconnected with his culture and that he was able to share those teachings with his own children and with his grandchildren today. So I express my thanks and my gratitude to all my family and my Muslim and Kukums for really showing their love, because they had no problem saying I love you to me. But I know for my mom, she didn't hear that from them. But to me, they were the most loving grandparents anyone can have. And I think of those memories. I remember I went to visit my Musum in Kukum, and I commented they had a red star blanket. And I was in university at the time. I said, "Oh, I really like your blanket." And it was a beautiful red star blanket. And so went home, and the next day at 8 a.m., my Musum and Kukum were knocking on the door, and they had washed that blanket, and they folded it up really nice, and they said, "Here, we're giving this to you." And that was their blanket. Like I took their blanket, but they're teaching me of that, of being generous and of sharing and of giving and kindness. And so they were always teaching, and with patience and with love.
How do we break these generational problems if not with love, if not with support, and that our children, the twins, the little ones, as imperfect as we are as people, at least our love is perfect. The only barrier is how do we deliver that in a perfect way? But I think that's something that everyone struggles with. But what did that love give to you? I mean, because for a long time I felt like I didn't have a place in the world, and I felt like I was broken, or I was not worthy. But you never felt that way.
I would say that love gave me hope, because I could see myself living a different life than some of the family, than some of the community that was experiencing addictions and experiencing loss. And that love and that patience from my parents really pushed me forward in that way, because they believed in me. And so they always said, "You're smart, you're going to go to school, you're going to go to university." And when you have belief, you start to believe that yourself.
Hi, my name is Ethan. My grandparents on my mother's side are Japanese. My great-grandparents and the generations before that were from Japan, and they immigrated to Japan. They lived in Vancouver area, and after the Second World War, they were moved inland to southern Alberta. I have a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, so that's my first degree that I've studied, and I'm working on a Bachelor of Education in secondary. Yeah, so far I'm just in my second year right now. So we've had a kind of an introductory course where it's about inclusion in the classroom. So we cover a bunch of different aspects of inclusion, groups that might need special, focuses or awareness in the classroom. And then I know later on in our fourth year we have an Indigenous Studies course that we will take. I've been really accepted into the family, I think. And there's been, apart from just being part of a regular family, I guess, there's also learning about the culture and traditions and all that I've had the experience of getting to do, and I've really been welcomed into that.
My name is Cardinal, and I'm from Sylvan Lake, and I'm here connecting with my family today. Evan Cardinal is my husband, and I'm not Indigenous, but my family is Indigenous, and I come here to connect in and just share some information about my experience and how I'm connected with the culture. My understanding about reconciliation is the healing of relationships between Indigenous people and others. I think it's about the truth. When I first truly was learning more about the truth that had happened Indigenous people. It was during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when they were hosting events throughout Canada and specifically in Red Deer. I attended an event, it was probably around 2008, 2010 in there. And I started to uncover, I guess, what the truth was for, you know, I'd always known that, you know, there were, I guess, a dark side of what happened for Indigenous people, but I truly did not understand that until I heard the stories and heard the stories firsthand from people who had experienced trauma in residential school, but throughout their lives, and intergenerational trauma that had occurred. And I think at that moment, I was able to relate that to some of the stories and experiences that also at the same time was unveiling and realizing about Japanese Canadians and internment. And I think it all just for me hit at once. And, you know, this deep desire for me to know the truth, not just about for Indigenous people, also about my family. It just felt like it was, I don't know if colliding is the right word, but I really just knew I needed to be much more intentional about getting to the truth of everything. Because what I realized is that through my family's experience as Japanese Canadians, I thought I knew the truth, but what I was getting was maybe what the truth was from the perspective of our government or from others and what others wanted us to know. Because sometimes the truth for those systems, it's more of information that helps us to just get over it and get past it. But what I realized was the truth for people that have experienced the trauma, you know, it's a different truth.
My name is Leona Cardinal from Sad Lake. Originally from outside of Kihiuan, Métis colony. I was a glad Jew. When I was in school, at that time, we only went to the library every 2 weeks and allowed 2 books. So I read them the first night. So I had to wait to go again in 2 weeks' time, read 2 more books. And I loved reading. All through the years, I read lots. Education is important to me. I want my kids to succeed. Go to school, go to university, get educated, get good jobs. And my grandchildren could do the same. Well, I didn't attend residential school. My parents raised me, and that's where they teach us how to work, housekeeping, looking after my siblings. My dad used to be the ones carrying us, and you know, I remember as a young child, we were living in a tent. That's the only part I remember. He was carrying me like this, swinging me, while my mom was getting mad at him. But like we were closer to my dad, because my mom was the one that was strict with us. Only later in life, when she was older, after my dad died, she started telling us that she loved us every time I talked to her. And I stayed with them while their dad was gone. Yeah, so a lot of it, I was alone looking after them. And as they grew older, hopefully they knew that I loved them very much.
Tansa Joel Cardinal Natsiga son, Igwa Nina Hiu Wihuin Kihu Kauput, Onichiskoponik Ojinia. Hello, my name is Joel Cardinal. I am the manager of Reconciliation Actions for the Gord Downie and Chani Wenjack Fund. Today you've been listening to stories from members of my family who've been talking about different experiences that they've had that reflect the resiliency of our Cree culture and identity. I was raised in Sad Lake in the community, and being the youngest in my family, I feel very privileged that I got to see those older than me pave the way when it comes to education. When the question came to what are you doing after high school, it was a very easy answer. I'm going to post-secondary. How I did that was by moving to Vancouver, studying at Simon Fraser University, and getting a degree in international studies so I can be a foreign service officer and work at embassies and consulates all around the world. After I completed that degree and spent several months traveling, I returned back to Edmonton and was quickly hired by a major law firm that was specializing in the residential school class action, specifically the independent assessment process that compensated survivors on physical and sexual abuse. I decided to take on this role, and I did it for 3 years, where I interviewed survivors, many of them from the same residential school my father went to hear about what happened. I won't share a lot of the traumatic stories that have been placed on my shoulders, but what I do want to share is the transformation in my mind that happened through listening to survivors. What we know is they were abused as children, and we often discuss that trauma and those abuses and those acts. But what's often left out of the conversation is what happens to those children as they become adults? What happens to a child when they are sexually and physically abused and they don't receive the love and nurture and counseling and care to help them through that? What happens is social problems, a lot of harms that they are faced as adults, such as drinking, drugs, cheating, and a whole host of other social problems that I realized were all of the reasons that I wanted to distance myself from my community. So by doing that work, I had to let go and forgive not just my community, but my own father for the impact that the residential school had on us, and for me incorrectly blaming where these problems are coming from. They're not because we're Cree, they're because of those schools. It's the residential school system which created all of the problems. And for me, as an adult, once I realized that, it triggered a transformation in my own mind and triggered a transformation in my own career trajectory. I no longer wanted to work for the Foreign Service. I wanted to be closer to my community. This past year, Blue Quills started the process of searching for the missing children in unmarked burial sites at the site of the former residential school. My sister Terry stepped up to coordinate and lead that search during its first phase and its first year. As soon as I found out my sister was doing this, I wanted to be a part of it and help in any way I could. From my experience working in the law firm, I've heard these stories, and it's been nearly 10 years since that experience representing residential school survivors, and I have felt like in the past 10 years that there's been this weight on my shoulders, these stories, and I have not known what to do with them. A couple months ago, it was announced at Blue Quills that they were creating a brand new program called an Indigenous Masters of Education program. This program was advertised to be grounded in the traditional teachings that residential school tried to take away and steal from our people. The instructors for this program will all be Indigenous and grounded in the traditional teachings that were attempted to be stolen from that residential school. 65 years ago, my father walked through the doors at Blue Quills Indian Residential School. And it was the start of many, many dark years. Dark and lonely years with no parents and no one showing him to the love that he needed as a child. Fast forward 65 years, I am making the conscious decision to walk back through those doors at Blue Quills as a student, but this time not to lose my culture and my identity, but to find it. Last week, I started in the Indigenous Masters of Education program at Blue Quills University, and I'm very much looking forward to learning all of the things that were stolen because of that school.